The stage lights hit like a physical weight. Thousands of camera shutters clicked in rhythmic bursts, a mechanical storm that blurred the faces in the front row into a featureless wall of white. Evelyn stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on a point just above the cameras, while the heat of the spotlights prickled against her skin. She was the focal point of the entire city. Every screen in the capital broadcast her likeness. Yet, the moment she stepped off the platform and entered the back corridor, the noise vanished, replaced by the dull, flat hum of an air filtration system. She reached her penthouse 30 minutes later. She locked the door, but the sound of the bolt sliding home echoed too loudly in the vast, empty space. She walked to the center of the room, looking out at the sprawling, neon-drenched grid of Paris. The lights pulsed in the distance, vibrant and alive. But she felt nothing. A persistent hollow ache settled behind her ribs. It was a cold, heavy sensation that defied every attempt to fill it with work, with noise, or with the adoration of the crowds below. She pressed her palm against the glass. The city glowed, but she remained entirely alone in the dark. She collapsed by the window, the silence of the penthouse finally giving way to the pull of sleep. The city vanished. In its place, a jagged black cliff surged toward a bruised, darkening sky. Below, the sea churned in violent, rhythmic crashes against the basalt. A mountain rose behind her, its peak shrouded in unnatural mist. Then, the silence broke. A white deer stepped from the fog. It did not move like an animal. It drifted, its hooves making no sound against the stone. Its eyes were pools of gold, ancient and burning with the weight of galaxies. Evelyn tried to turn away, but the gaze locked her in place. The deer spoke, a vibration that resonated in her bones rather than her ears. "You will come to Jeju." The voice was a command, absolute and inescapable. Evelyn jerked awake. Her breath hitched, her lungs burning as if she had been running for miles. She sat up, hands trembling, the taste of salt still lingering on her tongue. Outside, the Parisian night remained unchanged, yet the room felt like a cage. She looked at her phone, the flight apps already open. 3 weeks of this vision had eroded her resolve. The impulse was no longer a thought. It was a physical hunger to leave. She stood, grabbed her bags, and walked toward the door. The descent into Jeju changed the air. It was no longer the recycled stale breath of the city, but something sharper, carrying the scent of brine and wet stone. Evelyn stepped off the plane and did not look back. She rented a vehicle and drove south, the highway narrowing as the urban sprawl dissolved into green fields and dark, volcanic soil. The island was a canvas of extremes. To her left, the ocean churned in shades of deep, bruised blue. To her right, the black basalt cliffs rose like jagged teeth against the horizon. She drove for hours, her hands on the wheel, chasing a pull that grew stronger with every mile. Then, the road curved. Mount Sanbang erupted into view, a massive, monolithic rise of rock that seemed to anchor the island to the earth itself. She hit the brakes, the tires skidding slightly on the gravel shoulder. She stepped out. The wind here was different, cold and resonant. She stared at the mountain's sheer face, and a sudden, sharp clarity pierced her mind. She had never been here, yet she knew the texture of this stone. She knew the way the shadow fell across the base. It was not just a landmark. It was a destination she had been searching for her entire life. Evelyn walked toward the entrance of the Sanbangulsa cave. The transition was immediate. The roar of the wind vanished, replaced by the heavy, damp silence of stone. Inside, the only sound was the rhythmic drip of water hitting basalt, a heartbeat echoing against the walls. She sat on a low ledge, watching the tourists flicker like ghosts in the periphery, their voices distant and meaningless. She closed her eyes to steady her breathing, but the darkness behind her lids did not hold still. A pulse of blue light rippled through the shadows, faint at first, then sharper. It was not a reflection, it was a rhythmic flare that seemed to breathe. Evelyn stood, her boots scraping against the uneven floor. She followed the shimmer deeper into the mountain, past the alcoves where candles sputtered. The light led her to a narrow fissure in the rock, a jagged crack barely wide enough for her to pass. She pressed her side against the cold stone, exhaled, and squeezed through the gap. The air changed instantly. The damp, stale musk of the cave died away, replaced by a sudden, sharp draft that was cool, fragrant, and tasted like crushed pine and ozone. She stepped forward, leaving the world she knew behind. The narrow passage ended abruptly, opening into a vast, hidden bowl carved into the mountain's heart. Evelyn stepped onto soft, mossy earth that glowed with a faint, bioluminescent pulse. Everywhere she looked, crystal flora bloomed in the dim light, stalks of translucent glass casting prismatic shadows against the rock walls. At the center of this silent sanctuary stood a silver tree, its branches weaving patterns of moonlight in the air. The fragrance here was intoxicating, sharp and clean, like the first frost of winter. She walked forward, her heartbeat thudding against her chest as the ground beneath her feet hummed with a low, rhythmic vibration. Near the base of the silver tree, a mist began to swirl, condensing into a physical form. The white deer stepped out, its golden eyes locking onto hers with a gaze that felt like a bridge across time. The creature bowed its head, the movement fluid and deliberate. A voice resonated, not in her ears but directly within the marrow of her bones. "Welcome back, Evelyn." The sound of her own name, spoken by a voice she had never heard yet somehow recognized, halted her in her tracks. She stood frozen, the reality of the city she had left behind dissolving into the impossible light of this place. Evelyn stepped back, her heels digging into the soft, glowing moss. "I have never been here," she said, her voice thin in the vast space. The white deer did not blink. It shifted its stance and gestured toward the glassy surface of a small lake nearby. The water rippled, its color deepening until it acted as a perfect, dark mirror. Evelyn leaned forward, catching her breath. Inside the reflection, a woman moved through the same crystal forest, centuries ago. The face was hers, every feature identical, wandering beneath the same shimmering boughs. "You have been here before," the deer said, its golden eyes reflecting the movement of the stars. The resonance of the words had not yet faded when the atmosphere fractured. A cold, oily silence rushed in from the edge of the valley, a suffocating darkness, thick as ink, spilled from the trees. It moved with a predatory hunger, devouring the luminescence of the crystal flowers. Where the shadow touched, the vibrant colors bleached into gray. The silver tree at the center flickered, its branches dimming as the encroaching void pressed against the clearing. The air grew heavy, static-charged and freezing, as the light of the valley began to fail. The darkness did not just spread, it hunted. It surged forward in jagged, oily waves, swallowing the crystal stalks until they shattered into dust. Evelyn gasped, her hands flying to her throat as the air turned thick and stagnant. It tasted like ash and cold metal. Every step she took backward met resistance, as if the shadow were a physical wall pressing against her chest. The cynicism of the outside world leaked from the void, a crushing weight that clawed at her spirit, seeking to extinguish the memory of the light. She watched in horror as the silver tree, once blindingly bright, dimmed to a dull, sickly gray. The vibrant hum of the valley died, replaced by a hollow, ringing silence. Shadows coiled around her ankles like freezing iron chains. The golden eyes of the deer flickered, struggling to hold their luster against the encroaching tide. Evelyn fell to her knees, the ground beneath her turning brittle and dead. The last of the crystal flora vanished, leaving her in a suffocating, absolute dark. She could no longer see her own hands. The silence was complete, heavy enough to bruise, and the cold radiated deep into her marrow, demanding she forget everything she had ever known. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the cold that threatened to numb her mind. She reached into the silence, pulling at the weight of the sea crashing against black basalt and the iron-steady presence of the mountain. She did not reflect. She forced these memories to take physical form. She pushed them outward, a desperate act of will against the crushing void. A spark ignited behind her ribs. It was not a flicker, but a roar of heat that surged up her throat. A brilliant, blinding golden light erupted from her chest, tearing through the suffocating dark like a physical blade. The shadows shrieked as they were vaporized, dissolving into thin air under the pressure of the radiance. The light washed over the valley, stripping away the gray decay. Where the gold touched, the earth healed. Crystals surged from the soil, singing with newfound resonance. The silver tree flared, its branches catching the golden glow and reflecting it back in a cascading shimmer of moonlight. The air grew fragrant again, thick with the scent of pine and salt. The darkness was gone, leaving behind only the vibrant, pulsating pulse of a world reborn in gold. The golden radiance contracted, pulling back into the center of her being until it was nothing more than a fading hum behind her eyes. Evelyn blinked. The crystal flora and the silver tree vanished, replaced by the damp, uneven stone walls of the Sambangulsa cave. She was seated on the floor, the air smelling of stale incense and cold mountain rock. High above, the dim light filtered through the cave entrance, casting long, static shadows across the floor. A group of tourists shuffled past her, their voices echoing against the stone as they debated the history of the temple. They did not look at her. They did not see the residue of the light that still prickled against her skin. Evelyn remained motionless, her breath hitching as she processed the sudden shift from the vibrant valley to the quiet, mundane reality. Her heart beat with a steady, grounding rhythm. She looked down at her hands resting open on her knees. Her fingers were trembling. There, cradled in the center of her palm, lay a single silver leaf. It shimmered with a faint, pulsing moonlight that refused to dim even in the shadows of the cave. She curled her fingers around it, feeling the sharp, cold edge of the metal against her skin. It was real. Evelyn rose and walked out of the cave. The transition from the cool, shadowed interior to the bright, open air was sharp. Sunlight washed over the temple grounds, blinding for a heartbeat before her eyes adjusted to the brilliance of the day. The sea crashed against the black rocks far below, a rhythmic, deep-toned roar that anchored the entire landscape. She stood still, drawing in a long, steady breath. The air carried the sharp, clean scent of pine and salt, a stark contrast to the stale incense of the cave. She looked up at the sheer face of Mount Sanbang. It no longer appeared as simple rock and earth. The mountain possessed a weight, a quiet, ancient intelligence that seemed to watch the world with infinite patience. She realized then that the stone was a guardian, a vessel for the dreams that humanity discarded. She turned back toward the path, but paused, glancing over her shoulder one last time. Deep within the earth, beneath the basalt and the roots, she felt a flicker, a golden, piercing gaze. It was the white deer, waiting in the silence of the mountain for the next soul to remember. Evelyn stepped forward, her path now aligned with something far greater than fame. She walked toward the horizon, leaving the secret of the mountain held safely behind her.